shall start. My name is András Radnóti. I'm a foreign policy analyst, and I'm doing my PhD research at the Central European University in this city. I have the honor to chair this panel on what sort of strategies to tackle populism in Central Europe and in Europe at large, and especially with a special focus on the role, on the proper role of the media in this enterprise. What elites and especially serious media can do to tackle this side of populism that we now see unfolding again. There's two excellent journalists on this panel. Next to me is Mirjana Tomić, who is a freelance journalist and currently a project manager with the Journalismus and Medien in Vienna. And to her right is Judy Dempsey, who is a senior fellow with Carnegie Europe in Berlin. Now, I have a difficult-ish task. The brief for this section, for this panel, ends on a rather positive note. So it says, and I quote, "Quite recently, positive election results in some older EU member states have shown that the mission is not impossible if courageous democratic politicians present smartly formulated political visions." Now, I'm afraid that this well, you know, it sounds like it was written perhaps just a few weeks, perhaps several months ago. Now, it seems to me that there's much less reason to be optimistic in light of the elections in Austria a few weeks ago, and then in the Czech Republic just last week. But that goes also to show that this discussion is not out of date. And without further ado, I would like to ask Mirjana to present her paper, or indeed a comment on the role of the media in this noble enterprise. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm honored, honestly, to be here with Judith and with all of the people who have spoken before me. I think I should say a few words about myself, because everyone, the first thing they ask me, are you Serb? Yes, I am. I was born in Belgrade, but I studied in the United States. I did my master's in Mexico. My career was with the Spanish newspaper El País. I lived for a long time in Mexico, Guatemala. I covered the war in the Balkans for El País. And there are some other things there as well, but I'll make it short. I now live in Vienna. And I organize seminars for journalists to understand international politics, and I also do trainings for diplomats and journalists to know a bit how to, or to help them somehow if I can, to understand international issues. So this previous remark was written by István, because I am not so optimistic, but I would like to start with the end of this paper that I wrote and then go towards the beginning. I heard a lot of great things today about the local perceptions, and I will start with the end of the paper. The only way to tackle populism, whatever it means, with media is to know your place, where you are, and who are the people you're addressing. I will make a very unseemly comparison. Why was the Islamic State so successful in attracting people? They knew their target audience. If you don't know who is your target audience, it is very difficult to use media or any other means to revert the process that you think is dangerous. So I would like to start with that. I think that this is the first time I attend a similar discussion in Central Europe, and I think it was very enlightening for me, but I attend a lot of discussions in media. And I think that if you want to tackle or address journalism, it has to, populism, it has to be a multidisciplinary affair. You cannot say media will do it, academics will do it. Everyone has to do it. It is not one or the other. And when you go to media discussions, people speak about problems of media. Here it is an academic forum. Everyone is speaking about their studies. In both cases, I always have this very nasty journalistic question: have you been there? Have you seen it? I have heard, I am not in the academic circles, except when I come to this type of discussions, but I go to debates in Vienna to see what is going on, and all of a sudden I hear someone telling me an expert on terrorism, but they've never met a terrorist. So how can you be an expert on terrorism if you've never met one? And I have also seen and heard, it seems to me that what is happening in the academic world is very similar to what is happening in journalism, and that is due to the lack of money or due to the lack of time. We all give opinions about everything, but we don't really know what happens on the ground. How many academics you know that are experts in a particular topic and probably spend 2 weeks in a particular place? So, starting with that, I think the future depends on all of you who are Hungarian or who are, the future belongs to you. Now I shall go a step back. I covered the war in my country of origin, and today I may have the experience of having my second country disappear. I have a Spanish citizenship, and that may be a record. You have 2 countries disappear in a lifetime. My experience, I returned to the Balkans to cover the war after 13 years of living in the US and Mexico. And I would say that experience was the most important experience in my life, more important than any academic experience I've had, and I went to good universities, because I saw a laboratory of what was happening in front of my eyes. What does that mean? Nowadays, a lot of media and also people in political science speak of emotions in politics. So the reason is not important. It is the emotions. Well, I have to say, I have seen it in the Balkans long before social media. And I have not read any studies about it. My father did not believe what I saw on the ground. I saw what was happening on the ground, and he told my mother, I was already 35 then, he said, "You didn't bring her up as a proper Serb." And he didn't speak to me for 1 year. So that's how where I understood the importance of the impact of the media. And I had never seen him before as a nationalist. So the media in the Balkans, and you remember, Judy, it was the vanguard of the war. Yeah. So the emotions were already there. I can give you millions of examples. Example of me meeting somebody after 14 years in the street who is a professor of arts at the Faculty of Applied Arts, and he says, "I'm so glad to see you. I have to tell you about the Serbian cause. I have to tell you about the Kosovo battle." And it was like, after 14 years, this is what he has to tell me? I mean, it is a total madness. And I don't really know how one deals with this madness in a rational way. I would also like to say that, you mentioned Austria. I live there now. None of the mainstream media in Austria, mainstream, not boulevard, supported the far right. And they have almost 26%. So here we see also another problem of media, and that is really knowing the country where you operate, where you function. What do I mean by that? In the German-speaking world, and probably not only there, it is said that media represent the elite. Well, they do. They do, in a sense. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying they do. I read that in Britain, it's like 50% of print journalists finished Oxford and Cambridge, and a lot of them are male. But Big Brother Google knew I was coming here, and they sent me a study through Facebook yesterday from Munich, and so I could see that in Eastern Europe, it is also elitist, but at the same time there are a lot of women. But it makes really no difference. Do these journalists, Hungary, Poland, Austria, do they have the money, the resources, the interest, although they have the awareness to go to these horrible parts of those countries they don't really want to know about, and to know what people are thinking. I can tell you that I'm from Belgrade. I discovered where I was from when I started learning writing for El País. I had no idea what people were like 200 kilometers away from Belgrade, and that's where I made my first analytical mistakes. I remember at one point this nationalist Serbian guy, Bijeljina, 150 kilometers from Belgrade. I don't even know how far it was. I had to look on a map with Marcus Tanner. We looked on a map. Yeah. Where is it? So this guy, very few years of education and very few teeth, he was telling me, it was the war was about to start, and he was telling me, we Serbs know who are our friends on the international level. Yeah. And stupid of me, I said, no, it's now about democracy and human rights. Who was right? He was right. So this about democracy and human rights didn't really work in the Balkans. Let's hope it works today. So I think that number one, you really have to know where you function, and you have to know to do something, you as a journalist and as an intellectual, something that is very difficult when it is your society. It's easier for me to speak about Spain or Austria than it is to speak about former Yugoslavia, because my emotions come up and I would say things like, I don't want to deal with this person. But you have to deal. And I think that the only way a foreigner, whether they're journalists or they're intellectuals, can help you is in saying, you have to deal with them, let me help you. I will be very specific. I will use the example of Fox News. We have all heard of it, but I had the pleasure of seeing it in June. I was in the United States, and jet lag in the morning, and I started watching Fox News, and I became addicted. And the fourth day I wanted more, because they're so professional. It is, you don't say, oh, these people who listen to Fox News. No, they know their work. They do it brilliantly. Just like Islamic State. It is not like they lie to you. No one really lies to you. They do have two sides to the story, but every half an hour they give you a message. Like, against the elites, we are the people. And for me, the highlight was one morning, early morning, I heard a voice like a priest speak. And I turned around and I said, who is this? And that was the Vice President of the United States. And it was early June, and he was giving an interview, and he was talking about, this was right after the first Trump trip to Europe. He was talking about the most successful trip that the United States President has made to Europe. I have to admit to you that after 20 minutes I had my doubts. And did German media lie to me? And then I understood that Trump, we may stay in power for a long time. But then there is another aspect to it. I actually attended the 40th anniversary of my graduation at the university, and I went to a Jewish liberal university, not religious. And of course no one there had voted for Trump. And then the hatred that I heard against this other America, it reminded me of Serbia, of the primitive Serbia. And I was like, oh my God. And I told them, you must have been shocked at what people were doing in the Balkans, but this is exactly the same thing. And one person who is actually very involved in a Democratic Party, very close to Sanders, I told her, you have to see Fox News. You have to see what the arguments are. You cannot transport your argument. She said, I cannot. Well, if you do not, you will live in a parallel society. Another point, and you can stop me, and why I eliminated fake news from the title. I eliminated fake news because fake news is everything. Fake news is, I made a mistake in my paper. I wrote that 70% of the advertisement is taken by Facebook and Google. In fact, it's about 50%. Is this fake news? No, I made a mistake. Google reminded me also, happily, the day before yesterday, not Google, sorry, Facebook reminded me, of the latest study of Reuters. And that is, what are fake news for people? And they did a survey, I don't know, of 8 focus groups in 8 countries. It is their perception of what they like or they don't like. It's not about truth. It has nothing to do with facts. It is like, now the societies are so polarized. So I disagree with what you say. It doesn't really matter if you're right or wrong. I have 3 more minutes. I would like to tell you a very...
That's fake. That's fake.
Yeah. I would like to tell you very fast. First, a provocative statement, I don't need an answer. Who is paying for information in this room? And how much do you pay? Media is not free and it cannot be free. If you think that media come out of this, that information comes out of the screen, it doesn't. Someone is there behind it. And I personally believe that it has become so complicated to understand what we see on the screen that I personally believe in news literacy. And news literacy not only for children but for adults as well. People like yourselves at a very high level. I think that none of us understand the change is so big and so fast. It's a revolution. None of us really understand, are we seeing original reporting? Are we seeing something that comes from aggregated news? Are we seeing a sponsored thing? Are we seeing an advertorial? What are we seeing? That's one point. Another point is that none of the media in, let's say, Western Europe, except for Financial Times, I think, and probably Mediapart, has found a model to make money and to keep quality. Everything that is allowed today, the paper I used to work for a long time ago, it was not allowed. I was not even allowed to accept someone's coffee. Now everything is allowed. So if someone pays, well, they also expect something in return. Journalists, they were the first one to lose jobs with with economic crisis, and now you have all these wonderful platforms. So so media hired developers, engineers, etc., but there are no journalists. So, or there are a lot less of them. They have to produce for so many platforms. When do they learn something? When do they have time? Have you ever thought of it? Then there is there are like so many issues. When it comes to foreign reporting, and I'll finish here, although I have 50 minutes, foreign reporting, it is even more difficult. If you did not move from Budapest somewhere to the Ukrainian border, you're today probably, in Hungary or in Vienna, you're giving an opinion of what's happening in Spain. Do you speak Spanish? Do you speak Catalan? Do you know the context? If you do not know the details it's all about details, and these details are about local perceptions, and you need someone who knows the stuff. Even though you can sit here and say, well, I can read this and that, and I don't need a journalist from my country no, you need an interpretation, because without explaining what it means on the ground, news means absolutely nothing to you. And people are now making opinions. Are you for independence in Catalonia or not? Well, it's far beyond that. And I will close this thing, we become very aware of these things when it's close to our hearts. But when it's far away, we are just as superficial as everybody else. And when I was covering the war in the Balkans, I went to Mexico to get away from it all. And I was taking a taxi, and the taxi driver asked me, where are you from? And I didn't know what to say. I was covering that thing. And I said, from former Yugoslavia. And he said, why are they killing themselves if they have no oil? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for a singularly interesting presentation. I have a lot of questions. We'll probably go beyond 15 minutes with that. So first, I'd like rather to invite Judy to comment on what Mirjana has said and to present her own speech. Is that one?
It's on. First of all, Istvan, thank you. We finally meet up, and it's nice to be back in Budapest. What's on? It's not? Oh, I see. This one.
Yeah? Okay. This one.
Okay, thank you. 2 minutes gone, yeah? Okay. Phew, that's what a relief. Just in case you didn't hear me, thank you very much, Istvan, for inviting me. And it's really important to be back here. The first thing I saw from getting the bus in from the airport was that the big posters advertising against Soros. It's real, and it's very worrying. I want to go through you. I'm going to go through a few things you said. I have to tell the truth. Sometimes when people ask me, what do? I tell them I'm a doctor. And it's a very special response. A few years ago, I could say with absolute confidence and pride that I was a journalist. Now, if you say you're a journalist, oh yeah, you're creating fake news. Yeah, you have all this propaganda. It's actually quite dangerous to say you're a doctor, because you say, listen, I don't feel very well. What do you specialise in? So now I have to think of something else. I think I'll go back to journalism. But this anecdote brings me to the first point. We talked about not the original sinner, but the sinner business in the first session. Now this is the blame factor. And now journalists are blamed left, right and centre, actually left, right and centre, for giving false information, for taking sides, for being in the pockets of others and so on. And it's very difficult for journalists actually to operate increasingly in the declining space. The space for journalism is closing. We see it in Russia, we see it in Ukraine, we see it here, we see it in Poland, and you know the Western Balkans better than I do. This is the first thing. We have to defend the space, but we have to increase the space. How do we do this? And this fits into two aspects of fake news and the pressure on journalists. The journalist's task is to explain. The journalist's task is to reach out, and it's like a shortwave radio in the old days. You must always remember you've only got one leader, and you've got to keep that leader, and you've got to build up that loyalty. The old shortwave radios in Eastern Europe, and if you've got the RFV or you've got the Polish radio, you stick at it, and you have one listener and you stick to it. And the explaining is very, very important, because explaining is nothing if it's not backed up by a sceptical attitude. And scepticism for me is one of the real underlying points of journalism. It was very important for me when I was working in this part of Europe from 1979. I was anti-communist, but I realised why people didn't protest. Because if they did, their kids wouldn't go to university, or they would lose their jobs, or they forget about a passport that didn't exist in any case. So you have to be always sceptical and aware, and never ask others to do things that you're not prepared to do. You have to have a kind of compass. The third thing which you touched on is listening. There's too little listening at the moment. And when I left journalism in 2011 for various reasons, there was a kind of dialogue of the deaf. There was great editors still, but it was the older generation. Then we had to do the reporting. Then at the same time we had to do the website. Then we had to do investigative stuff. You cannot do everything. You cannot cover the ground. This gets back to my point that editors and owners of newspapers must invest in people. And investing in people to cover domestic news, and investing in foreign correspondence. It is so important to get these two components of keeping journalism alive. The next issue is, it brings me to media ownership. I'm very worried about, we talked about Babiš this morning, politicians dabbling in the media and owning newspapers. These must be separated. When you have politicians owning newspapers, and there's enough politicians at the moment owning newspapers, the newspaper, the idea of the newspaper, the idea of the word, the idea of the truth becomes contaminated. There must be a complete regulation of this kind of ownership structures, and we've seen the abysmal takeover and intimidation of the media in the Western Balkans. And we have, you touched on this, Mirjana, the polarisation in Poland now with the media, and the struggle to be right. But this is not journalism, and this feeds into the polarisation issue. And the other issue I wanted to raise, which I actually think is very, very important, is the case of Brexit. The Brits voted for Brexit for two reasons, and one of them was the media. The tabloids were viciously anti-European and anti-EU in every sort of way, and the Brits narrowly, by the way, voted for Brexit because the Europeans were cowards. Those who believed in the values of the EU, of what it stands for since 1945 and everything else, they were they were cowards and they didn't stand up for that idea of Europe. And Cameron was asked by the Commission and some others, not that the Commission people can speak in simple terms and succinctly, the Commission and some of the Council said, can we come over and campaign for you? No, I will lose him for, no. But we have to stand up and defend what we believe in, and believing in is this that comes into the EU. But a combination of EU cowardice and walking away from its values, plus the complete hijacking of the debate by UKIP and the tabloids. It continues, by the way, and every single day we see the UKIP guy, thankfully I've forgotten his name, Farage, always on the television. I don't understand why the media put him on the television. There are actually other voices. That said, to deal with this idea of news or non-news, to deal with this kind of propaganda, to deal with populists, first thing, do not demonise. If you demonise, you confirm all the worst prejudices of what they think. They think, yes, the elites hate us just because we're speaking the truth. Yes, we know populists have very legitimate reasons to think in certain ways and to act in certain ways. But you have to engage. And this means town hall meetings. It means whether it's local radio, or the BBC, here, Poland, anywhere, it means going down to the grassroots level and having town hall sessions with a mixture of young and old NGOs, pro, against. The voices must be heard. And if the voices aren't heard, you legitimate those who actually believe that the elites are to blame for everything. This brings me back to the blame factor. The elites are, we are the elites, frankly, but I mean, we have ourselves to blame as well, with our kind of complacency and our comfort zone. And if there's one thing the populists have done, is that they are breaking through this comfort zone, and we are still very much unprepared to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not rocket science, not to quote Trump on the North Korean guy, it's not rocket science in how to deal with it, but it's going to demand a very honest language, and a very democratic language, and a narrative that's actually based on values, firstly. Secondly, in these town hall meetings, when it comes up to fake news or anything else, we should put our cards on the table and say what we stand for. And we should ask our counterparts to ask them, what do they stand for? And if they don't stand for something or they're against something, how do they see their societies? And we've reached this crux in the media and journalism issue that instead of explaining and listening, the whole issue has become polarised. On one positive note, and it's very interesting what you're doing, there's now more and more, not many, but there's more and more institutes, the Reuters Journalism School in Oxford, they're teaching journalism. We have the Balkan Investigative Baron doing those. They are teaching journalism and giving them the courage, but also the professionalism. And the more this expands, I think the hope is that journalism will actually crack through that strange world of fake news. Fake news won't last. I mean, there are fads. And one way of combating fake news, actually, and it's long overdue, anybody who is on Twitter, they should identify themselves, and maybe they should pay as well. Because Twitter, they hide behind the anonymity of Twitter. And if you hide behind the anonymity of Twitter, you're more or less free to actually say anything you want, and it can be very hurtful, and it can be actually dangerous also. So on that note, I think things can be done, but it's going to demand a political will. Above all, it's going to demand a very different kind of narrative and discourse between those whose voices haven't been heard, and we touched on this earlier, and those who think that their voices are the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Still doesn't work.
There you are.
It's okay, we can share.